Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happenstance in this Truth Bomb riff. My name is Patrick Lovell. I am the producer with the $71 trillion truth, and I'm recording this on Friday, December 26th at approximately, let's call it 11:30 my time, 1:30 Eastern time. And I wanted to drop this Truth Bomb riff in between, Christmas and New Year's, obviously, to I don't know, connect with you and paint the picture of all of the stuff that's going on and what we must do collectively as a population in the United States, all that aren't MAGA, all that aren't you know into circling the wagons behind a cabal of pedophiles and just insane corruption and monstrous disaster on our hands in a way that we have to meet the moment head on. And a couple of things I think I want to just sort of riff on to start with is I think, right before Christmas, we're all just absolutely inundated with all things Epstein, right? All things Epstein files, 100,000 pages released, but millions more about to be released, and all the cherry picking that's happening with Pam Bondi's DOJ and whatever we want to call Cash Patel's FBI to, obviously try to minimize whatever Trump's exposure is, but at the same time, they're so inept and so stupid and incompetent. I think one of the funnier things that I'd seen in a very long time was that they had offered redactions that those who were, technically, I don't know, adept realized that you could do a couple of steps and then unredact the redactions to show everything that was in there. And all of a sudden, there's all of these pictures and other things and references that weren't meant to be seen. And again, I mean, these idiots, these clowns in the Trump administration are so freaking deranged and beyond incompetent, but at the same time, they're the guys in control, right? And so, yeah, it's a disaster. And I'm going to share my screen. I was kind of really again not taken aback, aghast, blown away. Just this thing I'm going to share with you, and I think it's a really great job. So hopefully, yeah, in the New York Times here. Am I sharing? Yeah, I'm sharing. So this was on the front page this morning, and it says one relentless year. And check this out. I mean, you got that. How'd you like to be that poor immigrant, right? Just getting his head frickin' in a chokehold there by probably ICE, Border Patrol, whatever, and then the two big guys coming down on him, and I'm sure he's on his way to one of these alligator uh, Alcatraz sort of scenarios. But it says here at the beginning, so much has happened since President Trump took office that it's hard to keep track of it all. And so what they do is they basically, well, here's another paragraph that I think is pretty cool. Here, out of the blur of events, are some of the most consequential, illuminating, or just plain remarkable moments from this first year back in the White House. So power flexes, like the picture we saw above, wasn't the power flex. But Trump kicks off the presidency with a record number of his executive orders. Of course, there's led to Doge, and as a result of that, I mean, just thinking about that, the power of the pen, and basically, he didn't even know what he was signing. This was just put in front of him, of course, by the likes of Russell Vogt and Project 2025 and Elon Musk. That led to Doge, and Doge would lead to the end of U.S. aid. And we know that there's been over 600,000 people that have died so far in Africa, mostly children, as a result of ending U.S. aid. Yeah, I know a lot of folks are like, well, it's about the CIA. Probably has some affiliation with CIA budgets, but a lot of it good was happening too. So 600,000 dead, mostly children, right? And so he also pardoned his supporters involved with the January 6th riot at the Capitol. Yeah. I mean, my God, that was baked in. And by the way, just a quick commentary on the J6 scenario. The one thing that absolutely boggled my mind the whole time was when I first saw J6 unfold on my television screen in real time, as I was in the midst of the release of the con, by the way. I looked at that group and I knew several days in advance that it was happening, that there was people from all over the country gathering at Trump Hotel, and they were going to protest this, that, and the other because of all of the Fox-led media about Dominion and the election being stolen, and they were going to demonstrate and everything that took place on J6. But what was clear to me from the very beginning was somebody was facilitating to have a lot of those people flown there. And I knew they weren't all there on their own dime. And ultimately, we learned that there were, you know, police officers from all over the United States. There were uh, masked, shall we say, folks that had returned from the likes of theaters in Afghanistan and 20 years of war that seemed to be working or affiliated with, I always believed Blackwater, which is Eric Prince's initiative. And of course, those guys are all mercenaries. And they came up during the, post 9/11 war on terror, but they ended up becoming goons that were involved with all sorts of huge money spheres of influence from UAE and Cyprus and things that were involved with Russia as well. And so I suspected the whole time. I mean, even at the moment, that was the first thing that popped in my mind. And lo and behold, when we ended up with the January 6th Inquiry Commission, they tried to pin this whole thing on Donald Trump as the mastermind. Donald Trump, as we all know, is not a mastermind of anything. So it was this apparatus that pulled him in, and they just told him to, obviously pardon all the supporters, and they did. They had this plan so far in advance, and the Democratic Party and mainstream media are so incompetent. They're on the level of, quite frankly, all things Pam Bondi and Kash Patel of the Trump cabinet, honestly, and they have been forever. This is a great article that I'm going to keep rolling through, but at the same time, I believe with everything I am, the only reason that I ended up having to do everything that I did post 2008 forward is because the New York Times failed to do their job. They failed to tell us all of the ins and outs of 9/11. They failed to tell all of the ins and outs of 2008, which I ended up doing. I'm still perplexed about all things COVID, mostly the fraud that took place during COVID. But then it's just the ongoing dark shadow scenario that's enabled this insanity that we're all in the midst of that we've got to turn the tables on. And that's why I'm rolling you through this. So moving forward, and it's really helpful because, if you don't see this in pictures and laid out in a chronological order, it's hard to retain all of this information, like the Times says in that first paragraph, right? It's just like a blur, all of the stuff that's going on. But Trump deploys the National Guard in LA in response to protests, much of which have since been ruled illegal. He tears down the White House's East Wing for his ballroom. Of course, a lot of people are conveying that or speculating that's going to be a bunker of some sort. How the boat strikes of Trump's are Trump's most extreme test of presidential power. I mean, this is his own military force. Wow, look at that photo. Jesus Christ. Just, whether or not those guys are drug runners, they may have been drug runners. But again, it was like 2,000 or 1,000 miles from our coastline. They're probably going to another island. I mean, it's just theater, but theater, unless you're those guys, and I'm not laughing. It's just like, oh my God, imagine being those guys. Holy shit. Just pounded. Oh my God. Anyway, targeting race. Yeah. I mean, Trump blames DEI and former President Biden for a DC plane crash. God, forgot about the ATC disaster, air traffic control, which was just insane. My God. Agencies scramble to remove references to DEI and gender from their website. Oh my God, just completely, erase like the last 20 years of progress. And then, of course, senior military leaders are fired as Trump attacks woke officers. That was mind blowing. Arlington Cemetery's website is one of many to lose pages devoted to Black history, and that's just sickening. When you think of, in fact, I was watching Ken Burns' American Revolution documentary, and I was surprised to learn that there were so many African Americans who participated in the American Revolution, quite frankly, which was shocking. But let alone what happened in the Civil War and everything else. And this just is like, we're going to erase Black America's, impact and sacrifice in all of our collective wars. Yeah, that's exactly what we're in the midst of. Not to mention the Librarian of Congress is fired for her pursuit of DEI. So in order to form a more perfect union and equality and establish justice, for all is completely central to this administration, especially the second round, because of everything that has been fomented through the Project 2025. And I learned recently, and Project 2025, of course, came out of the Heritage Foundation. And the Heritage Foundation is a part of the Koch brothers scenario, but it was originally funded by Adolf Coors, who is also a very well-known neo-Nazi of the Coors family. And the Koch brothers, I learned recently, Fred Koch created the John Birch Society. So these guys have been organized white supremacy from the very beginning, and that's what would ultimately go into Project 2025. And as many of you have learned from these truth bomb riffs, that Phil Gramm, the former senator of Texas, who was central to all of the deregulation that took place during the Clinton administration, was basically the mentor to, and I just mentioned his name. Darn it, I sometimes get a blank on the gentleman who's about my age actually, who we give all of the credit to Project 2025. Anyway, his name, I just mentioned his name, but he worked for Phil Gramm. And then ultimately all of these convergences of these things, they've been around for 60, 70 years in terms of organization, and they've just evolved. And they basically have been intrinsic to libertarian billionaires and basically creating control for a corporate fascist state that I always say we are, as opposed to a democracy. Moving forward, mass deportations. Yeah, wow. I mean, we knew it was coming, right? But I mean, it was pretty amazing to see all of these situations with ICE in Los Angeles and Chicago and Washington D.C. Hundreds of migrants whose countries won't take them back are left in Panama as a result of one of the scenarios. ICE officers arrest Rumeysa Öztürk, a student who co-wrote an essay critical of Israel. Yeah, no longer free speech, man. We are going to take everybody down. And of course, Kristi Noem visits a prison in El Salvador where hundreds were deported. Least we forget, I believe she was given a private jet that's somewhere in the neighborhood of $135 million, something along the lines of just over. And let's, I mean, when I think about that, I think about Trump going on Air Force One every weekend to Mar-a-Lago. The expense for their personal grift is absolutely extraordinary. This, meanwhile, while Doge, right, and firing people from air traffic control or the National and Weather Atmospheric Sciences Organization. I could go on, right, and USAID. I mean, it's incredible what we've seen, and nobody is safe from this. One thing I say a lot is that I've been trying to get people's attention now for 5 years about the corruption that's going on in the United States and is the biggest corruption in the history of the world that's never ended. And I couldn't do nearly as much to get people's attention on the urgency of this matter than what Donald Trump has done during his first year in office. He's, I frequently use this as a metaphor. He's using a giant shit sandwich to waterboard the country into submission. And no matter who you are, you can't stay in a silo because nobody is safe. That's really the sum total of what's going on here. And it is exemplified by the New York Times. It's really quite extraordinary. While, South Africans arrive in the United States, other refugees are not allowed. Yeah, unbelievable. And aggressive initiatives like courthouse arrest and boost deportations. I remember seeing those about 5 months ago. I mean, was it theater? Not if you're those guys. I mean, they just round them all up, throwing them into Alcatraz or on in a plane that was, what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of the airline that profit from this stuff, right? And they're unmarked and they fly them to El Salvador into these brutal prisons. How refusing to turn the planes around escalated deportation efforts. That was interesting. That popped in my mind right before that happened. But yeah, I'm sure they got a lot of gang members. I would imagine, but I don't think they got. I don't think nearly. They got innocent people swept up in this stuff. In fact, I haven't heard about the hairdresser. If anybody wants to mention in the description below, what happened to that hairdresser guy that ended up in El Salvador? Yeah, lost track of him. Diplomatic threats and deal making, Iceland or Greenland, I should say, and Panama Canal. I've been seeing more reaction to that recently on Blue Sky. People in Greenland saying, "Hell no, way no," But I mean, what are the people in Greenland going to do if the United States decides to invade? Not much. And I'm not saying that from a position of arrogance. I'm saying that whether whoever's in the mix, obviously, I mean, it goes without saying. But yeah, I'm certainly, let's put it this way. I'm an American not in support of colonizing Greenland, okay, for example, for what? Minerals, for energy. And by the way, as I recall, Greenland, I believe, is the world's leader in hydrocarbon, uh, meaning not hydrocarbon, that's not what I meant to say. In zero emission release, what am I trying to think? Hydrogen. Hydrogen is what I'm trying to say, not hydrocarbons. Hydrogen for energy. So there's that. But obviously, that's not the reason why Trump wants to invade Greenland. And then he proposes Gaza be rebuilt as a seaside resort, and all Palestinians leave. This after, I don't know, 60,000 Palestinians were killed in the post October 7th reaction by Israel and everything that's been going on. And then he takes credit. Oh, well, here we go. Vladimir Putin. Boy, that was a humdinger, right? And that's may have been what was going on in the beast. We'll never know what was said, but obviously, Putin certainly has compromat on Trump. That's what this whole thing is about. And moving forward, Trump bashes European allies and questions whether the UN should exist. That was September 23rd. He also waged war on renewables at that time. That was during Escalate Gate, I think, right? And yeah, no, he literally waged war on renewable energy. I've been predicting that was coming. And I say that particularly if you are someone who puts the climate, crisis at the apex of your issues, particularly if you work in the renewable sector. Trump has rug pulled the funding for offshore wind, all sorts of regulations against, emissions, and is destroying renewable energy. And he's going to open up leases in open spaces, which is a big issue in my state, particularly in protected lands, based on national parks and that sort of thing, that many of us hold sacred. And yeah, I mean, it's just, we're talking about an avalanche of just like, for everybody who's been in their silos thinking about one issue scenarios, he's brought everything to the fore. And I've been trying to get people to understand that for now years and years and years. That's the collective message of, quite frankly, all of my documentary filmmaking going back to 2013. If you go, and it's free, and I'll put it in the link or the description below, I highly encourage you all to take a look at it, because the issues that we discovered during the Occupy Wall Street movement that we released in 2013, which is what, basically 13 years ago, could have been yesterday. It's all the exact same stuff. And you might be asking yourself, well, there was a, what's the word I'm looking for? There was a huge response by the American people to the 2008 great financial crisis. And many people were trying to put all of these issues to the fore. And what got resolved was ultimately nothing. The billionaires controlled everything as a result of that. And that's where I come in. I'm the one who revealed what everybody was asking questions that never were able to get inside the systemology of what it is that was going on to be able to prove why all of this stuff is happening. And we're still in the exact same place in 2026. It's quite remarkable. 2025, but soon to be 26, right? What is this? He convinces Hamas and Israel to agree to a ceasefire. I'm not sure if I'd give him credit for that. And I don't know if there's anything to celebrate here, but I'm sure it's a lot better than being bombed every day. Yeah, my God, the whole scenario and the West Bank and not West Bank. What am I talking about? Gaza. Even though West Bank's got its own situation. So, how Trump is berating Zelensky to recast America's role in the world. That's obviously happening at this very moment. And but this is a big one, the year of retribution, right? So what do we see? Trump has federal prosecutors fired for their role in investigating January 6th. So here's a word to the wise, right? For all of you idiots that decided not to take down corruption, it took you down. Yeah. You guys were playing both sides of the fence ever since 2008. You didn't go after Wall Street and the financial system for destroying hundreds of millions of people around the world. You played, ball, talking out of both sides of your mouth, trying to be everything to everyone, but the donors got protected. And this is the result. This is why corruption births and fuels fascism. My message to everybody out there that the purpose of character is to not to yield to complicity or duplicity. I learned a long time ago that there's two columns of our soul. You have character, honesty, dignity, integrity on one side, and then you've got complicity, duplicity, and duplicity on the other. And everybody is forced to deal with that one way or the other in their lives, no matter how big or small the situation is. But in this particular situation, because federal prosecutors didn't take down corruption, they end up getting fired. That's how it works. Ultimately, the administration threatens to freeze 2.2 billion in aid to Harvard. Yeah, and then Harvard capitulated. You remember when Harvard was being set up by Rachel Maddow and Lawrence O'Donnell as like these guys that are going to be able to push back against the Trump administration? And what happened? They ultimately capitulated. Why? I'm sure you're filling in the blanks as I'm saying this. Because of money. Because huge institutions like Harvard receive billions of dollars in research funding. Because what did we do in the United States with corporations because of tax code and all of the offshoring and outsourcing that's taken place during this neoliberal, let's say 5 decades long march? Companies used to be responsible for research and development, and they had relationships with universities. In the vacuum of offshoring and outsourcing, it became the focus of, because of policy and everything else, and I couldn't give you all of the specificity of how it evolved, but universities became the home, and they always have been, but to a certain degree, but more so during this era than ever before. They're where the research happens. And the research comes from the federal government. And then Trump taught us a thing or two, which wasn't Trump, it was Project 2025. Russell Vogt, by the way, that's who I was trying to think of earlier, who worked for Phil Gramm, Russell Vogt, of course. But these guys know this. They knew exactly where the soft points were of soft power, and they knew exactly how to rug pull it. And it was comprehensive, and it was incredible, and it didn't happen overnight. It was literally decades in the making, and the opportunity was Trump. He's a transactional pig, and I use the hashtag Rico Pedo Pig, right? That's what he is. He's a racketeering president who's protecting pedophilia, and he's our president in complete control because he's not in control. He's working for all of the people who put him there, okay, including Putin. Now, here's a picture of Letitia James. Just quickly, obviously, in the retribution case, I discussed this in more truth bombs than I cared to remember. The ridiculous aspect of this whole thing is he was accusing her, and it's been thrown out of court now twice, I think, by juries. But at the same time, I think he's going to do it again because of the nature of weaponizing the DOJ. But Letitia James, of course, got a civil conviction against Trump to give him the death penalty to move him and his family out of New York City because of being engaged with mortgage fraud. And particularly as it relates to appraisal fraud and using that in the schematic of how we build loan portfolios so that he could get loans. And some of the things that he was involved with are so audacious, it's insane. Like they increased the square footage of one of his penthouses in Trump Tower 3 times, like somebody with a freaking measuring tape couldn't get out there and just figure out what the square footage was. Not to mention him, basically saying that the appraisals were, I believe, many, many times, I don't remember specifically, I think it was 3 times more than everything in his building, square footage wise, right? And why is that? Why would he be doing that? Because he wanted to, brag? No, it's because he was able to loan against that. And he gets loans. And by the way, that's his income because the nature of tax schemes. And ultimately, people like Donald Trump, especially when you're north of $1 billion, you use loans from the bank as your income because of the tax write-off, because it's less than, obviously income, and it's less than, all of the other apparatuses within that tax vehicle and those shelters, especially in real estate. But that's how it's built. And so he turns the table, he gets these goons in the Justice Department, and, they bring this mortgage fraud case. And I believe the mortgage fraud case, it was something that Donald Trump is guilty of, and really Governor Abbott in Texas and his attorney general, as well as many of the Republican, senators and Congress people, were all guilty of what he was accusing Letitia James of. And he got the information illegally from, whose name is it? Mark, whose dad was involved with selling Trump's Palm Beach. Oh, no, yeah. Yeah. In fact, Epstein and Trump were fighting over this palatial mansion in West Palm Beach that he ended up selling to, I think it was an aluminum magnet in Russia for probably 4 times the value, and it was in a money laundering scheme, and that was crucial to actually ending the relationship between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein, supposedly. But interestingly enough, it was all about money laundering. And I guess another reason that I bring it up is because I'm pretty sure that was funded through Deutsche Bank. But I do know for a fact that Deutsche Bank was, of course, on the receiving end of this Letitia James case, because supposedly the way her conviction or her indictment went was that Trump was doing mortgage fraud upon the bank. What Letitia James didn't understand, and I'm talking about the Attorney General of of New York, right? And here I am, Patrick Lovell, the producer with a $71 trillion truth, telling Letitia James what she missed. Why? Because I am an expert in all things control fraud, i.e., appraisal fraud and lending fraud and real estate fraud, which is all of these elements that go into this. And what she didn't understand was that the fraud wasn't from Trump on Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank was involved with the fraud because of control fraud. And oh yeah, they were laundering money for the Russians as well. Okay. And Letitia James didn't want to go there. But again, just like I talked about the prosecutors that ended up getting fired because they were investigating and prosecuting, and they did arrest the January 6ers, right? Here's a situation where Letitia James didn't do her job, just like every DA, just like everybody at the FBI, just like everybody at the DOJ didn't do their job to bring down Donald Trump. And because they didn't take Donald Trump down, he's trying to take everybody else down. And he's doing a pretty damn good job of it because, again, he's got very powerful and smart people in the mix that are telling him what to do because he would have no freaking idea. Okay, that's what's so ridiculous about all of this. Moving forward, at Charlie Kirk's memorial, Trump says he hates his opponents. That was a big moment, man. That's when Stephen Miller, who is the White House chief of staff, who's basically running the show, came out and said, we're going to go full-blown fascism, and that the left doesn't know what's coming, which obviously all of these things that I've been laying out are part of it. But yeah, look at this fireworks like it's an all-star wrestling match in front of everybody. I remember it was like early part of the season, football season, because they were in Phoenix, and that's where the Arizona Cardinals play. But Turning Point USA, yeah. And of course, the assassination of Charlie Kirk and everything that his wife is involved with now, which is really weird. And all things Candace Owens and God. And this one right here, Trump handpicks U.S. attorney to bring charges against James Comey. And she's just like, what, another, I think she was in a beauty pageant, beautiful woman who, like, I think she was an insurance lawyer. I'm sure she's probably relatively smart to get through law school, but she was in over her head trying to bring prosecutions against James Comey, the former director of the FBI, and Letitia James, the state AG of New York. Yeah, they were all thrown out because this woman is a bimbo. And I think Trump was actually, I think I saw from Michael Wolff something along the lines of Trump just likes to hire beautiful attorneys to say, look at how pretty my attorney is. Something ridiculous like that. But it's the Mad Magazine, Mad King. It's absolutely insane. Oh, but this was huge though, right? How major law firms showed Trump that he could bend others to his will. But see, here's the story about how this fits in with everything that I've been telling you guys for a long time. The tall building law firms, they've been in on playing roulette with American democracy because that's where the money is. These guys have been doing this long before. They've been doing it my whole life, quite frankly, but it's gotten out of control, particularly during Obama's administration, because they let Wall Street get away with destroying tens of millions of people that led to tens of trillions of dollars being given to the bad guys that I reveal every freaking day. And but here it's just out in the open. The tall building law firms, just like the universities, they have major clients that are involved with the United States government, and there's so much privatization going on. I mean, the biggest of the big. In this case, it was the law firm of Paul Weiss. Look, all of these guys are involved, and including Covington and Burling, by the way, which was the place, the revolving door where none other than Obama's Attorney General Eric Holder went. And they all bent the wheel to corruption because that's how they get paid. That's why they get paid, quite frankly. So it's insane. So you do not live in a democracy. I keep telling you, this is a corporate fascist state. And this is how. When these law firms with all of these like top guns, these guys that come out of like, the best law schools in the country, and they're relentless and they have the resources, the money, they go where the money is. They're not representing freedom, democracy, the rule of law, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. They're fighting for corporate interests. And they were able to plug in, obviously, their people through the revolving door in Congress and the Senate. And now we know the Supreme Court, guys. 2025, I hope, is the year where all of this stuff comes to a head, because it's crushing everybody and it's not what we think we are. And we're in the shadows. And here the New York Times is laying it all out. And it's a brilliant piece. I love the way they did it. Magnifying the military. Okay. So the military is the only last institution that's standing between absolute authoritarianism and fascism, and what was left of our decaying democracy. But at the same time, the New York Times establishes here. I mean, we had that military parade in Washington for Trump's 79th birthday, which was insane, and nobody showed up, of course. But it was just another waste of money. And at the same time, for what purpose? To what, deem, the great Donald Trump our dear leader. But then it goes into Trump claims crime is out of control in DC and deploys the National Guard. And I love that picture of just some random dude who's probably jogging right there in the mall, and then some tourists taking some pictures with all of this, returned armor from our 20 years of war in Iraq. I remember all of my friends, or war on terror, all of my friends who were in the military, they kept telling me, man, they're going to bring all of this hardware back to the United States and use it against the American people. I've had friends tell me that since probably 2004, and they were right. And here we are. I remember seeing, do you guys remember seeing those pictures online of trains with all of these vehicles, going to every place in the United States? People have been calling this out forever. And of course, here we are, right? After J6, right? And then, of course, massing the forces in the Caribbean to threaten Venezuela. And does anybody think for a second it's about, drug running and that sort of thing? No, they've got the largest oil deposits, even though it's thick crude, on earth in Venezuela. That's what the regime change is all about. This was one of the best moments for me. How a speech to top brass brought MAGA to the military. A lot of people might say, no, they all sat stoic and silent. But at the same thing, this is a picture, my friends. This is a tremendously important picture because, like I said previously, and I've been saying this since I discovered it in my mindscape, because I have to like frame things for me to understand things. When I was making my first film, Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream, and I'm picking up all of the pieces of these stories back in 2011 during the Occupy Wall Street movement. And my colleague Eric Vaughn and I are approaching Washington, D.C., and I'm trying to put it all together in my mind. And I'm seeing it for what it is in real time. And I came up with that, that statement that all of us have two columns of our soul. You have character, dignity, integrity, truth, decency, justice, that sort of thing, against duplicity, complicity, and hypocrisy, right? And that's free will. Everybody, every human on earth has the ability to think through situations. And, whether or not you live in a free society or an authoritarian society, people have got to make choices, right? And this stoic silence, right? And silence is complicity. But in this particular case, what we were learning was a lot of these guys had a chance to communicate in person, so they weren't being basically ghosted by whatever sort of Palantir-like internal machine to know who's loyal and who's not, and that sort of thing. I mean, it's kind of a big enterprise, but they could get together in person and basically say, yeah, we're not down with this. We're not following orders. We can draw a line in the sand and everything else. And we've seen a lot of resignations, and we saw resignations in the inspector generals of the DOJ and the other people at the DOJ. I don't know how effective resigning is in the midst of this madness. Now, a lot of these people that are resigning, I mean, they can take their pensions and they've been working as career guys, and they can go into the private sector and probably make a lot of money, and it's probably safer that way. But at what expense, right? I mean, really, the United States military is supposed to be about the American people, which is supposed to be about the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. And we're not supposed to use the military against the people of the United States, which of course Donald Trump is doing with ICE, in the name of, rooting out illegal immigrants. But there's all sorts of other stuff that gets caught up in the mix, not to mention destruction of habeas corpus and due process, right? Which the military is supposed to serve. Once you get past that, that's absolute authoritarianism, i.e., fascism. Now, in our country, the difference between the United States and, let's say, Germany of 1930, the ideology is different. I think we're just a lot more selfish. I think people are a lot more opportunist. They go to where the money is and they're like, yeah, well, let it be somebody else's problem. But until what? Like I've said about Letitia James and the guys that were working in the DOJ that got fired. Eventually everybody gets caught up in this situation. And that's why Donald Trump is doing me a favor and why I'm trying to connect with millions of you to understand what's really going on. And the New York Times, of course, in this piece is just laying it out, which, further adds credibility to everything that I'm revealing to you. And of course, dismantling the government subject, the fork in the road. 2 million federal workers are emailed offers to resign. 2 million. Most probationary workers are fired with mass job cuts across agencies. Elon Musk wields the chainsaw for bureaucracy. Now, this has a huge relevance to what my work has always been about and we revealed. So if you watch The Con, I'm the producer of The Con. I used to be able to tell you that you could watch it for free because all the American people buy our lies. But worryingly and interestingly, the team that has the rights has pulled The Con, and I'm not sure exactly why. I'm not in control of the rights of it because of the way things had to evolve for me to get this thing done. But at the same time, we show in episode 3 of The Con, and by the way, you can private message me. I know where it is, and you can buy it. And I don't know how much longer it's going to be, but if you're interested in seeing it, I don't know what's going to happen next with The Con, because it is the revelation of the largest criminal conspiracy and cover up in the history of the world that never ended. And it has all the details because we did what the DOJ, the FBI, the SEC, and state AGs around the country couldn't do, which is why I was able to do what I do with the new Untouchables, because they are the elite legal experts that have got 30 years of prosecutorial experience that have taken out thousands and thousands of bad guys over the course of decades to the tune of billions of dollars. That's why they're working with me. That's why I have the ultimate credibility. And that's why you've got to discover what we do on the new Untouchables as well. But this picture, as it rolls back and forth, that was not an original situation. That came out of back during the savings and loan crisis, or during the savings and loan era. A bunch of representatives bought chainsaws to basically destroy regulation. That's what Elon Musk is doing here. And by the way, it all happened during the time of Jack Welch was the CEO of the biggest company, GE, right? And there's always been this confrontation for the last 40 years between government and regulation protecting the American people and big money interests, particularly through the financial scenario, that are basically trying to, take shortcuts and get product to market that can create disaster. But regulation is what prevents that from happening. So you can fly safely, so that you can, live in a house that actually stands. I mean, it's just like, it's insane. But what people buy into is you got this guy who's now worth, I think, $700 billion. And by the way, I've got the $71 trillion truth. So, Elon Musk doesn't even come close to the value of what I'm offering you and what I have. He's trying to destroy everything. But that was not original idea. That came from, obviously, which proves to me that all the same people that have been involved with this madness for like the last 40 years, and I could go on and on and on about that. In fact, I might tell you one little story. So I was in the American Enterprise Institute, which is run by all the biggest corporations in the country, and it's actually right across the street from the Trump Hotel, which I think they're selling. And in fact, the day that we were there to do an interview with this guy named Wallison, who used to be the general counsel for none other than the former kind of head of Wall Street, who was at Merrill Lynch, Reed. Anyway, he was the top guy during the Reagan administration that created all this stuff in terms of deregulation, and led to all of these decades long of pump and dump and savings and loan that would lead to all of the different fluctuations of these mammoth insider trading and what all manner, shape, or form of financial fraud. And anyway, I was sitting in the basement doing an interview with this guy, and he was one of the guys who co-wrote the Federal Crisis Inquiry Commission's final sort of takeaway. And this is just how it works within Washington, D.C. when they do investigations. They have Republicans and Democrats, and then they basically battle over what actually happened, and then they make their case. And this guy, being the general counsel for, the former, basically head of Wall Street that created all of this deregulation in the 80s, looked at me at the end of our interview, and he looked at me and he goes, "It's all rather Orwellian, isn't it?" Because they set all this stuff up 40 freaking years ago, man. And this is the end of it, okay? And I knew this the whole time. I knew this was the direction we were going. But my God, if it doesn't get summarized in one picture, it does certainly there. Okay, so moving forward. The longest government shutdown in history disrupts services like air travel. Were you one of those stuck on the tarmac for 4 hours and disrupted and you had your life? You're probably complaining to everybody in your office and everybody else. "Oh my God, I'm stuck here. Oh, woe is me," right? Well, meanwhile, what role did you play in allowing this stuff to take place? Again, like the folks that were at the DOJ who didn't prosecute corruption ended up getting fired, like Letitia James being in the retribution circus. All of the employees, everybody who played a role in allowing Trump to become the president of the United States so these technocrats could destroy everything we thought we were as a, superpower and what I've grown accustomed to my whole life, were disrupted, and more to come. You can't sit on your ass hoping somebody else is going to come to the rescue, because what happens is inaction leads to destruction. That's really democracy. If you want to know the truth, it's a full contact sport, man. And at this point, everybody who stands for dignity, integrity, liberty, and everything else, we're getting our ass kicked, okay? Because we're not organized. Trump renames the Institute of Peace for himself after seizing control. Trump, not only is his name on the Kennedy Center right next to one of the greatest presidents in the history of the United States, John F. Kennedy, it's now on the Institute of Peace, even though I knew that. Donald Trump Institute of Peace. Talking about Orwellian, going back to what Wallison said. Yeah, Wallison, you're right. How USAID was shuttered in just 2 weeks. Yeah, unbelievable, man. And that led to 600,000 people being dead, as we know. I'm not even going to go into that anymore. Now, this is the biggest part of it to me in terms of, trying to reach you folks out there, self-enrichment. Trump issues a crypto token called Money Trump, Dollar Trump, days before being sworn in. The guy's pulled off in his businesses, Liberty Financial, somewhere north of $5 billion. The presidency gets paid something like $470,000 a year to be the most powerful person in the world. That's not enough for Trump. Trump had to rape and pillage the presidency to do everything that we've seen so far and get away with $5 billion so far. And what are you doing? Pretending like none of this is happening? Oh, it's happening. A billionaire VIP row attends Trump's inauguration. Why? What have I been telling you? Let's take a look here. Oh my God. What really is funny here is, God, what's his name? Oh my God. Oh my God. This guy, Howard Lutnick, the former neighbor to Jeffrey Epstein, who's just the biggest piece of garbage I can imagine. But look at all these clowns, right? Obviously, our man from Facebook, Bezos. I'm sure this guy is probably an AI. Obviously Bezos' beautiful wife and their $25 million Zuckerberg is what I was trying to think of. But all of these guys, and then you've got obviously Kennedy back here, and they're all complicit. They're the guys that this Clean New Deal right here is going to take down for destroying the United States. If millions of you understand what it is I'm revealing to you, which is exactly laid out. It's like eyes wide shut. You can't ignore this. And then the Trump family's crypto firm gets $2 billion investment from the United Arab Emirates. And obviously they're getting an Air Force base in Idaho. Oh my God. Talking about, privatization. Jesus Christ. You can't get, and by the way, to that point, you remember when Stephen Miller and they had this huge initiative right before the No Kings rally, particularly the one that took place in October, where they were like, everybody who's involved with marching on No Kings is a, ally to terror and Hamas and that sort of thing. people, it's Qatar and the United Arab Emirates that are funding Hamas, and they were doing it through this guy CZ who Trump pardoned. My God, people, to have them do that with such audacity and have maybe probably a vast majority of the population go, oh, I better not show up because I don't want to be, tarred and feathered as a terrorist supporter. You idiots, they're the ones that are playing ball with terrorists. And you're just like, what are you not getting about this picture? That's the biggest thing that we have to smash is the ignorance. We've got to destroy. We've got to absolutely, just like that picture of 1984 or the Apple ad that was based on the Orwell depiction of 1984 when, she throws the hammer through the illusion. We've got to shatter this illusion of this insanity. It's all lies, my friends. The entirety of the Trump administration is a lie. The entire formula is to lie, deny, switch the blame, and implicate. That's how it works. I've actually known about that kind of stuff since I was in college in my fraternity because I saw how guys would do that. And I've always been an honest guy. I'm not stupid. I'm not, I'm not naive. I've seen a lot in my life. And I guess that's maybe how I could see right through this stuff for the last, quite frankly, 13 years putting it all together. And Trump accepts a plan from Qatari, the royal family of a new Air Force One. Holy shit, people. You know what kind of work has to go into that, make sure the bugs get out and everything else? And just imagine who's in charge of that and what they may or may not be doing. I mean, it's just such a joke. It's out of control. His Trump meme coin hosts a tour for the largest investors. Remember that? Everybody got a front row ticket. And I remember watching a lot of these people really pissed off that they paid a lot of money and they didn't get an audience. You know what? Too bad, suckers. Trump hosted a private dinner for the White House ballroom donors. I'm sure they've made out pretty well. How crypto emerged at the center of Trump's conflict of interest. Yeah, my God, people. Crypto has no value. Crypto is just a laundering scenario for super rich people that are trying to destroy the dollar, as far as I'm concerned. And they may yet do it yet, but investors are still riding high. Obviously crypto failed basically during the Sam Bankman-Fried era about 2 years ago, and it's made a big comeback because Saudi and UAE and Russia and global terrorists and global drug launderers and everybody else, they use crypto, okay? And then you can buy influence with Bitcoin, economic whiplash, the tariffs, all of the other things that came down. And then he tours the Fed renovation as he spars with Jerome Powell. By the way, the New York Times is trying to set this up as good versus bad and that you got to have independence at the Federal Reserve. Jerome Powell was involved with insider trading with his good buddy who was the head of the Dallas Fed, Kaplan, over the course of the last few years. And Jerome Powell came out of the largest hedge funds / private equity, the Carlyle Group, that are involved with all manner, shape, or form of military-industrial complex, and that's the guy who's the head of the Federal Reserve. So if you don't know much about the Federal Reserve, the only reason that Donald Trump's making a big show of this is even though the financial community has everything in their back pocket with Jerome Powell, Trump wants more. And by the way, to all of you that are on Wall Street that are like, yeah, how far can we take this roulette? Think of the guys that were at the Department of Justice who didn't prosecute corruption that got fired. Think about Letitia James, who didn't go after Deutsche Bank and get RICO convictions in a criminal situation, or Merrick Garland or Jack Smith or any of the others. This is the result of inaction. And you guys, yeah, you're getting money on the short term, but eventually, just like what happened in Nazi Germany, Hitler was supported by the industrialists, as well as the industrialists in the United States and the financiers in the United States, as it turns out. And they all won because they played both sides. That's what financiers do, quite frankly, especially in the war profiteering stage. But Donald Trump is going to make a lot of people pay. The longer that he's there, the more that, and he's just banking on the fact that everybody's going to give up. And I'm not giving up. Are you going to give up? Let's see. It says here, I have directed my team to fire this Biden political appointee immediately. She will be replaced with someone much more competent and qualified. This is in regards to Lisa Cook, okay? Oh, sorry. That's the Labor Statistics Commissioner. He's also trying to fire Lisa Cook, and she's on the Fed Board of Governors, but I reveal how the Federal Board of Governors failed us and bailed out Wall Street. So there's no good guy here. And by the way, I'll just say Lisa Cook, Letitia James, Jeffrey Epstein, Deutsche Bank, JP Morgan Chase, the Federal Reserve, SCOTUS, they're all part of the same story. And same with John Paulson and I could go on. It's unbelievable. It's all the same story of what I reveal to you in and out of my truth bombs every day. And I think I'm up to like 717 now. So if some food stamp payments are blocked during the government shutdown, you remember that 42 million people were about to lose their SNAP benefits, mostly children. So Trump, as he's wheeling and dealing and getting all of these billions of dollars illegally from terrorist organizations around the world, is starving people in the streets. Again, another reflection that you can't live in your silo. Yes, we all have the four walls of our existence, but you don't understand. This giant shit sandwich of waterboarding into everybody's mouth means that nobody's safe. You got to be able to rally around a cause that's going to be requisite Project 2025, which is what I'm getting to, but not after we continue to go through the last year of Donald Trump's smash and grab, looting, destruction of everything we hold dear a year before the 250th anniversary of the Revolution of the United States. And by the way, that's a reason why I created my first movie, Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream, because I always loved American history. And yeah, I'm aware of all of the, conflicts and, the three-fifths statute and that we're not a perfect in order to form a more perfect union sort of thing. Yeah, I get American history, my friends. The bottom line is that the idea, of course, of liberty and justice for all through the integrity of law because of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution depends on character and integrity. And everybody can lie. That's what I'm trying to expose to you. And I have been, and I continue to. And this is, I think, a really good way to do it. How Ground Zero in Trump's trade war points to a vulnerable economy. Yeah, a vulnerable global economy built on supply chains that finance has created that basically left the United States completely vulnerable. I'm not America first, but I can tell you that I know that if we do what we have in the Clean New Deal, we will recreate the middle class of the United States. And there's a way to do that. Because right now, the whole purpose of corporate America is to squeeze and squeeze and squeeze and squeeze until they can get the last blood out of a turnip. And they do it to basically, I mean, it's like a crack addict, right? Or somebody at the blackjack table or Texas Hold'em or whatever, gamblers that will do everything, but yet they're backed by the full faith and credit of the United States. And we'll get to that because they're playing with our money. They're playing with Uncle Sam's money. They're playing with illegal money, house money. And we've got to change that. And that's the end of that. Wow, boy, that was a lot. Holy cow. One thing I did want to mention, another piece that came out of the New York Times today. So this is really interesting. You see the fractured dollar here, okay? And this is written by a guy whose name I can't pronounce. I'm just going to try it. It's Gang Nagabar Bunanantan, I guess. And anyway, he was is the managing director of JP Morgan, and he was a deputy chief of staff to Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. So this guy is making the case that, basically the exorbitant privilege of the dollar as the reserve currency is coming to an end if we don't make certain changes and protect the Federal Reserve is really kind of the full scope of this article. But a couple of things that I want to read here that I think are important. So America has long enjoyed an exorbitant privilege of the world's dominant economic and financial power. As the United States returned to deficit spending in the 2000s, foreign governments were building their currency reserves. They stockpiled dollars and treasuries prized as the safest and the most liquid assets in the world. This gave the United States a structural advantage. These governments bought our debt and were largely indifferent to price, driven by policy mandates rather than profit. It was as though America had a broad and growing base of loyal customers who showed up no matter what the cost, however, rather than shoppers who were ready and willing to walk away for bargains elsewhere. This helped the United States borrow vast sums at very low rates. And I could certainly discuss that more thoroughly, but I'm going to continue. By the early 2010s, these foreign governments made up 40% of the Treasury holdings, including those of the Federal Reserve, that the Federal Reserve held. Excuse me, that's an important point. That was up from just over 10% in the mid-90s. The Fed, another policy-driven buyer, deepened this cushion through rounds of bond buying during and after 2008, 2009, during the global financial crisis. At the peak, over half of the US debt was financed by institutions that kept borrowing costs artificially low. Those easy times are over. Foreign markets now make up less than 15% of the overall treasury market, while they still hold roughly the same dollar amount of treasuries as they did 15 years ago. Foreign governments purchased haven't kept pace with the growth in US debt. At the same time, the Fed has reduced its treasury holdings by roughly 1.5 trillion over the past few years. That, by the way, is called quantitative tightening. So far, the treasury market has coped pretty well. Private investors have stepped in, a testament to the strength and size of our debt market. Yet the treasury market is now more exposed to profit-driven market forces than ever before. The country has high amounts of debt, making upswings in interest rates and changes in other borrowing terms very costly. As we sustain and potentially grow our extraordinary deficits, the return of private sector into our debt markets will most likely result in higher interest rates as private investors demand greater compensation for holding US debt rather than their policy-driven counterparts. Rates will probably be more volatile as well, swimming more sharply in response to data. Policy signals in America's now chronic political dysfunction. US officials are especially nervous about the growing role of hedge funds, whose highly leveraged trades can be disrupted by market turbulence and amplified turmoil in the treasury market. Over the past 4 years, hedge funds have doubled their footprint in the US market, making the Cayman Islands, where many hedge funds are officially based, the place where most US debt outside of the United States is held, according to the Fed. Typically, people flock to treasuries for safety in times of crisis, yet driven in large part by hedge fund activity. The treasury market went through unusual turbulence during recent stocks. I'm going to come back to this in a minute, but I do want to make the point here that my friend, Zev Shalev, just released his book 2, chapter 6 of The Greatest Heist. And ironically, given what I just read you, this was all about Jeffrey Epstein's involvement with Bear Stearns, particularly when he was involved with the offshoring, because that was his specialty. And so Zev goes and makes this case of this is what triggered the financial crisis of 2008. And he's not wrong entirely, but there's a lot more going on than just this. But this had a big role to play of it, especially as it relates to the New York Times coverage and non-coverage of JP Morgan Chase's involvement with Jeffrey Epstein through this guy, Jeff Staley. And that just came out in 2025. But I'm using this to once again demonstrate that this has been the story for the past, I don't know, it's really like 30 years at least, but at least the last 15 years. And ultimately it does tie back to Jeffrey Epstein. But that statement that all of the hedge funds, the largest owners of debt outside of the United States are in the Cayman Islands because of these hedge funds. And they're involved with all sorts of shadow sector stuff that's very much like what Epstein was involved with. And I can assure you that had a lot to do with blowing up the world. Okay. So ultimately, let's just go back here real quick to this particular article, and let's see where is he going into this whole thing. I think I've got a paragraph here that I think is important. The most dangerous are proposals for government to take convenient shortcuts. One would have the Treasury tactically shift what type of debt it issues to take advantage of one-off moves in market conditions rather than doing so in regular and predictable manner. Even if feasible, if this approach would almost certainly not result in lowering borrowing costs in the long term. Another would have the Fed aggressively cut interest rates to make U.S. borrowing cheaper. Indeed, investors are increasingly concerned that the United States might engage in debasement to inflate away the real value of its debt, harking back to days when monarchs diluted their gold and silver coins with cheaper metals such as copper, inflating away the debt as a partial default by another name, and the market would treat it as such. History teaches us that the foundation of any debt is credibility. Okay, so I could go on. He's making the case that you can't make the big changes at the Federal Reserve, but credibility, listen, my friends, I'm going to stop sharing here. Well, yeah, I'm going to go full screen just to make this point real quick, and then I'll come back because there's 2 more things that I want to show you. Like credibility, okay? Credibility of our debt markets. First and foremost, some people, particularly in MMT world, say bonds are bullshit. We don't fund the federal government with people investing in our treasury, okay? That might be part and parcel to all sorts of variables that are involved, potentially currency stabilization and that sort of thing. But we were selling tens of millions of liar loans that we inflated through this entire apparatus that goes from origination through appraisal fraud all the way through the credit default. The credit rating agencies that were tasked, and these are big time part of Wall Street, where the likes of Moody's and Standard and Poor's and so forth, they have professionals out of the Ivy League that are economists that are supposed to look into what the portfolios are that these securities are that are being sold out of the market. And it became known, and this was part and parcel to the movie The Big Short, that got the top line right, but didn't go anywhere near what we do in the con, that ultimately were filled with liar's loans that were designed to fail. And so the math on it was there was a $4.5 trillion housing market that ultimately became I think it's a $900 trillion global calamity in the derivatives market because of all of these different pipelines. And it goes into this financial innovations such as credit default swaps, collateralized debt obligations, and others, where they're trading, basically sawdust, okay, masked as real loans, and people have to, invest in risk. And so investors from around the world, like Russia or China or Saudi Arabia, as well as people in those countries, they are investing in mortgage-backed securities at that time because everything is presumably safe. Meanwhile, the entire market was selling liar's loans. And obviously that's not very subtle. And so ultimately, in the end, they blamed everybody who took out loans that they couldn't afford, that they didn't understand, because there was all sorts of fraud in the mix. And fraud is illegal theft by deception. And it is a felony in different degrees of felonies in all which manner, shape, or form Donald Trump has been in the midst of his entire career. If you see the new Untouchables as well as my my truth bombs, I interact a lot with a guy by the name of David K. Johnson, who's been covering Donald Trump for now decades. And Donald Trump has been in the mix of this forever. And we've known that, but yet the American people still allowed, even though I think that the election was stolen, but still millions voted for Trump nevertheless. And, they voted for a criminal pedophile that is works with our, works with terrorists and, enemies of liberty and justice for all, to create tyranny so that they can basically create this global cabal of thieves, which has been going on now for decades. And the question is, have you had enough? Have you had it up to here? Are you going to, how like a lot of the times, let's say people who have gotten overweight, or maybe they drink too much, or this, that, and the other, they have a New Year's resolution, and it's like, okay, I'm going to change the path forward because my life isn't sustainable this way, and I can make myself better. Well, that's true of the Clean New Deal. And if all of this stuff makes you disgusted because of this toxic, polluted, disgusting everything that the New York Times just, laid out on a silver platter for us, and that I do for you every single day, are you ready for a cleanse? Are you ready for the ultimate cleanse? Because I can tell you right now that even though a lot of people on your feed are talking about a movement to build a movement for the midterms that's going to deal with Donald Trump. It goes without, I think a lot of people, particularly in the Times, a lot of, well-known people, influencers, and other pundits in our society, think it's a foregone conclusion, whether it's Lawrence O'Donnell or, I'm not sure if Rachel Maddow thinks this way, but that it's a foregone conclusion that the Democrats are going to win. Okay, well, what are they going to do? Literally, what are they going to do? Are they going to destroy the corruption that's created this situation that I continue to tell you about? No, they're not. There's a lot of folks that I listen to out there that want to create a sort of revolution driven by people like Zoran Mandani. Okay, he's a person that's not white Christian, that represents other people. And from what I'm hearing, we could definitely use, considering MAGA as a right-wing Christo-fascist cult that is also white supremacist. Yes, I would like to see a lot of people run for office of color, but not because they're people of color, because they understand corruption. They understand the turmoil of this insanity that we're in the midst of, that's destroying everything that matters, and realizes this is the end of the road. for a lot of us, right? We're never going to probably see freedom again if we don't turn this thing around. And I don't know if we're going to see a free and fair election. I think it's going to take tens of millions of us rising to the moment and being seen, and then forcing democratic states to basically not allow what these MAGA folks are doing with gerrymandering and watching the polls to lie and do all that stuff that goes back to Jim Crow that we saw in the last election, especially in swing states. And that's part and parcel to everything that's in the Clean New Deal. But it's going to require a lot more than that. It's going to require everybody getting their heads around everything that I'm trying to tell you. And it's nearly impossible because people just want to be on their feed for as long as they can see whatever stimulates them. And then they're off to the next thing, right? That's what I call the four walls of our existence. I'm going to go back here to sharing my screen, and I'm going to finish this up. If I may, let's take a look at what else is on there that I was interested in showing. So maybe you're just seeing me for the first time and you have no idea who I am. If you want some perspective, I highly encourage you to check out Patrick Lovell, Truth Bombs the Con. We just did a really great recording with David Sirota. Many of you know him from the wonderful film Don't Look Up, but he's also the editor-in-chief of The Lever. And he joined us to discuss his latest book, Master Plan, which goes back to the Powell memo, the former Supreme Court justice who was a big time attorney for the tobacco industry that got revolved in the Supreme Court, that led then what was basically a reaction to Ralph Nader and all things, the civil rights movement and things that were happening to try to get a hold of corporate America. And these guys planned their ascension and their revenge at that time in the culture wars. And that's what led to the Heritage Foundation and ultimately the Koch brothers and Project 2025 and what we're in the midst of. That's literally my entire life. I was born in 1968 and I'm 57 now. And, for those of you just coming up in the world, let's say you're in your early 20s. Yeah, man, this is all about organization. This is all about money. This is all about having, and that's the thing about corporations, right? Corporations are top-down hierarchies. They have incentives for everybody to get in line, play their role, and do what the corporation wants them to do. That's what's led to all of this stuff, overcoming the United States' institutions that were developed after the American Revolution to create liberty and justice for all through the Bill of Rights and, of course, the Constitution. And we've had 248 years of evolution, guys, that had more sacrifice of blood and treasure that most of us have never known, and maybe we'll be forced to know, and are being forced to be in the know right now as a result of all things Trump administration, right? And so ultimately, guys, what I want you to consider is to please check out thecleannewdeal.org. It tells you exactly what we must do. It tells you exactly what we're going to do. It tells you all of the things that created now with the added dimension of revealing the $71 trillion theft by these institutions to rug pull democracy, destroy media, destroy the truth, evolve an ocean of lies and madness that are basically destroying everything that matters. And so I know that there's more good people in this country than bad, but the crazy thing is, one, attention, two, commitment. And we need millions of you to understand that if we don't come to the fore, my God, it's all over. And what we're doing right now, my colleague and I, Roseanne Rabiella-Mille, is we're doing a big reach out with people that are going to run for office in the midterms. Doesn't matter what district, if it's for Congress, if it's for something local, whether it's obviously the school board or dog catcher. A lot of people like to say that. We're trying to equip everybody to understand how the Clean New Deal fits with whatever their micro campaign may be, right? And we've already made some really great inroads, and there's more to come. But ultimately, what you need to understand is that what we reveal here, and it's taken me 14 years to kind of configure all of this stuff, even though, as many of you know, I studied political science at college. I also studied journalism, and then I went on to become a producer. I've been in the corporate hierarchy for a long time, and I went independent. And I've been, on the front row of this stuff in the trenches for now 14 years with my collective work, Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream, and of course the Con. In the Con, we only got half of the information out that we have that reveals everything that we led to in the Clean New Deal. So I'm just going to set this up. Just if you've taken this long, or excuse me, if you stayed this long, and thank you for your time. that um, this basically reconfigures what it is that we are to shatter the illusion of what people are confused about. So, as I say here on the landing page, this is a declaration to reboot the American dream. We don't live in a democracy. We don't function in a capitalistic system. We don't have free markets. The law is unequal. We do not have separation of power. Corruption rules everything. People, why did we have an American Revolution? All of the same exact situations, okay? And so the Clean New Deal is democracy's answer to reboot the American dream. How are we going to do that? Well, you got to understand the precepts of the Clean New Deal. There are four questions that you have to resolve in your mind like a Rubik's Cube. And when you put all four sides together, then you can understand who we are and why we are the what we are. Okay. So remember a few years ago, we had Black Lives Matter. The question you have to ask yourself is, what is qualified immunity? Qualified immunity allows police to shoot to kill and not be held accountable. In a rule of law, in a rule country where the rule of law is above all else and nobody's above the law, this is obviously a lie. If cops can shoot to kill, there's no incentive for them to not become corrupt. Now, I've said many, many times, and I'm not suggesting that the cops should not be able to shoot to kill, like in London, for example, right? No, during January 6th, they should have shot to kill a lot more than they did, and there's reasons why they didn't, for example. But if, for example, there's a young black youth running away in, a cop plants drugs in his car to justify the fact that he shot him in his back, those are the types of things that we're talking about, okay? And so, like everything else, the police cannot be above the law. Same with judges. What is judicial immunity? My friends, the reason why this technocratic circus of billionaires has been able to accomplish what they have is because they were able to purchase the Supreme Court. Now, I've learned over the last year or so that the Supreme Court wasn't always for the people. In fact, more times than not, it was for the power. But obviously, everything that led to my lifetime, and any of you who were born 1968 and after, that was because of the civil rights movement and all of the other progressive movements that, really came the entire history of the United States that would then give us the judges that would then rule on behalf of a government of, by, and for the people, rather than what we're in the midst of right now. And so we've heard people like Sheldon Whitehouse talk about ethics at the Supreme Court. What we're saying is that the Supreme Court justices must be held accountable for corruption, particularly as it related to etch-a-sketching American history, the 14th Amendment, Section 3, that gave us Donald Trump and presidential immunity. A king who is this guy. Look at that picture. It's the emperor's new clothes on really bad acid. That's what we're in the midst of. How are you living with this, right? We have got to be organized. We have got to turn the tables on this guy and MAGA and everything else. And it's the greatest opportunity in the history of the world, in my opinion, to bulldoze the misery of tyranny and unleash the renaissance of possibility. And another piece of that is you got to ask yourself, what is the Electoral College? The Electoral College, a lot of the Republicans like to say that we're a representative republic. And what they mean by that is rule by the minority. The days of billionaires holding up in places like Wyoming and having more legislative influence than the state of California has got to end, because that's how these guys are able to pull this off. Not to mention the documentation, fabrication, and the falsification of the electoral slate that took place in 2020, where Donald Trump and the Republicans were literally trying to steal the Electoral College in swing states. That's what Fani Willis's case was down in Georgia, and we still haven't fully wrapped our head around that, but that's what it's all about, guys. So we've got to end the Electoral College. So when you put it all together, you can understand that the first thing we have to do is we got to create a new modern-day Glass-Steagall Act to basically prevent the full faith and credit of the United States from being floated to, provide tens of trillions of dollars in liquidity illegally to a criminal global syndicate, which is what our financial system has become. When you understand what we've done in my truth bombs and the con, and obviously this document and so forth, what we've proved is that the lessons that were learned after the Great Depression, we knew how all of this stuff worked, and we stopped it. We created a Glass-Steagall Act that prevented the separation of commercial banking from investment banking. You have to have investment banking be able to push the envelope and create new technologies and research and development and risk reward for investors so that people can, come up with great things that, solve the world's problems. That's the idea. You can't use the full faith and credit of the United States to illegally backstop criminality because our system is not holding crime accountable. That's what this first precept is. The second precept is to end Citizens United so that we get dark money out of the elections because of shadow banking, shadow influence is the greatest ROI that's taken shape. And that's why we have a completely corrupt system that is of by and for the corporations and the corruption, or I should say the corrupt corporations. Then we have to demonstrate how $71 trillion was looted illegally to basically provide the criminals endless money to destroy us and the law. This is absurd. People, we don't depend on foreign investors to finance our government. That's not how it works. We are a fiat currency first and foremost, but second of all, Congress has the power of the purse. Congress can determine anything that it wants to budget for. And if we have all of the right people in Congress, whether your issue might be Medicare for all, it might be, rebooting the renewable energy sector. It could be a whole qualified laundry list of things that are important, like ending systemic racism in prisons and all of those sorts of things. We've got to create incentives for a dynamic, vibrant country predicated on the law. That's what we have to do. What we've got are incentives to basically create extraction for criminal fiefdoms to destroy the law. That's the reality of what we're in the midst of. And we turn that around when you understand, and this is mostly for people who are running for Congress, where are you going to find the money for this? You're not going to find it for state budgets. You're not going to find it in local government. That's not how we fund state and local governments. But the federal government is different, okay? The federal government it has an entirely different operation, and it's not dependent upon bonds, even though I think that, I don't even want to go into the details of that. But yeah, it's important to have, international investment, but predicated on honesty. And quite frankly, that's what that wire from Morgan Chase was just saying, that markets have to have faith in credibility, which is predicated on the law. That's what he says. This guy's coming from JP Morgan Chase, the Treasury, and we all know what JP Morgan Chase was now involved with well, we shouldn't say all, but a lot of us understand what JP Morgan Chase was involved with Epstein, to name a few, which is tiny in comparison to what their involvement was with the 2008 great financial crisis, by the way, which you can get from the con. And so further, we got to expand SCOTUS to 13 justices to basically balance out the reality of this Roberts Court. We've got to end qualified immunity in judicial community and presidential immunity. Nobody should be above the law. We've got to end the Electoral College, and we've got to institute term limits for U.S. senators and representatives. We've got to prohibit all insider trading for members of the Senate, House, and Representatives. I'll finish off on that note. Marjorie Taylor Greene came into Congress worth $700,000. That's a lot of money to a lot of people. She's leaving with 25 to 27 million. She's been there for 6 years. Do the math on that, okay? Absolutely insane. So if a Congress member is making, on par, $160,000 a year, and she's walking with roughly $5 million a year, where's it coming from and why? Okay, what about Trump walking with $5 billion? Guys, the government, I would encourage everybody to take a look at the FDR speech at Madison Square Garden when they created the New Deal, okay? And he said that, what we're fighting are the forces that consider government an appendage to their aims. The old forces of evil from banks and finance and monarchy and this, that, and the other. Yeah, it's the exact same battle that we had then. And that's what we're in the midst of now. So what I would encourage everybody to consider here as well, as I'm going through the Clean New Deal, look, the sum total of a lot of people's experience that I've been involved with so far, they're like, boy, I really love you because you don't ask for money. I don't ask for money. I'm not going to ask you for money. but I can tell you that we've spent millions upon millions of dollars to do the work that we have, and tens of thousands of hours that came from somewhere that you didn't pay for. And I'm giving you the truth, the $71 trillion truth that can change everything for free on a platinum platter. But organization costs money. That's why the billionaires in Project 2025 have become so successful. And for people to run from New York to Los Angeles to Honolulu to Miami to Anchorage to Seattle to Austin, this, that, and the other, you got to have money. You got to have money to put this, front and center, and we got to create a national movement that's going to overwhelm the systemology of corruption that is destroying everything, literally everything. And if you want to support us, one of the greatest things that MAGA did, and I hate MAGA for it, but at the same time, they're made in China, they're made in China hats and so on and so forth. They are effective because it shows you're a part of a tribe, right? I mean, it was smart, and it was made in China, right? To make America great again. It's just so ridiculous, but it's all thanks Trump. But what we've done, and this is made in America, we've created the swag of truth, right? So stop lying. Stop buying lies. That's the whole premise of the Clean New Deal. We've got this wonderful swag, hats and shirts and dog handkerchiefs, and we've got coffee mugs and so on and so forth. And if it represents your disgust with all of the things that are happening that are all predicated in lies, you've got a whole marketplace here that will go and fund the Clean New Deal's support of candidates around the country that will have to run on this premise to return the power to the people. And yeah, it helps. Is it going to me? No, it's going to go to all of these different organizations, our organization, to get funds to people that are running for office on the Clean New Deal. So I would encourage you to do that. And also you can customize this stuff. And I just realized that. I didn't know that. But this is absolutely beautiful. So it's got all these products. And then also, if you feel like making an end of the year contribution that's tax deductible, we are a 501c4. And let's see how you can do that. I think we have a GoFundMe page or something like that. But yeah, we've had people contribute a little bit here and there, and that's very nice. But you can donate here if you choose to. Look, many people are going to donate to all of these different elections, and who's always been one of the key big fundraisers for this type of thing, and we're going to see it in the midterms, is Bernie Sanders. And Bernie Sanders is, I think he raised like $169 million in the 2016 election or something like that. And I'm going to stop share here and go to the end. But, where did that money go? Really? I mean, I think it went to, putting him and AOC out there on the anti-oligarchy tour earlier this year, and maybe helping Zoran Mandani and everything else. But he's not ending corruption. Okay, I love Bernie Sanders. Trust me. He says a lot of the right things, but he speaks in hyperbole. He speaks in platitudes. I'm speaking in details. Okay. And by the way, do I wear what I wear? Yeah, look, check it out. The Clean New Deal. See, this whole thing here, I love this shirt because this is, why can't I get that? Oh, I know why, because this thing got closer on me. Sometimes it does that. But anyway, it says, look, this is the boulder of truth, right? And it's, I don't know what's going on with it. Anyway, how do I do this? It's kind of funny. Do you teach your children that it's okay to lie, steal, and cheat to become president? What we need are millions of people to help push the bowling ball boulder of truth to the top of the mountain, to roll it down and take the corrupt bowling, like take the skinheads bowling, if you guys remember that back in the day. I was a former punk rocker, man. Punk rock in my heart, man. And I'll always stage dive into the truth and liberty and justice for all. But thank you for devouring this incredible truth bomb riff. And I hope that you guys have a wonderful new year. I hope everybody had a great holiday yesterday. I know it's freaking funky times, man. And, but the beauty of this whole synergy is that, like I said, when you, me, and everyone you see who isn't an Aussie, who come together, who believe in liberty and decency and dignity and beauty and sustainability, when we merge in unity behind the Clean New Deal, we'll purge the misery of tyranny and unleash the renaissance of possibility. Are there better ways to spend the people's money than on corruption? It's a rhetorical question. And is anything possible? Yeah, both good and bad. Anything is possible. It's what we will it. And we have to join and unify by the millions. I'm serious. We have to join and unify by the millions. But when you have the truth, you're bulletproof. So stop buying lies, stop lying, and get hip to how we save the world and ourselves, quite frankly. Onwards and upwards, amigos, and I hope you have a wonderful new year. Thanks for listening. Take care.